Hey, hello, Earthlings, and welcome along to the Animal Rights Show. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that we're now part of the Vegan of Course media platform, and so this has been streamed out to about 8 different locations. As ever, the best way to interact with the comments is probably to tune in to the Vegan of Course YouTube channel. But if there's not many people on there, then you could maybe try my one, because people are used to tuning into my YouTube channel for the Animal Rights Show. But we'll get there in the end. As you can see, the panel here is a little bit different to usual, in the sense that both Wendy and Nella are away. Although I think Nella might have a connection where she's traveling, and she said she might be in the chat. So we'll wait and see on that. And so welcome along. And this is a bit of a somber occasion, in the sense that we want to make it a celebration, but we want to mark respectfully the life of Neil Robinson, the very first professional vegan football player. And it's pretty raw for you, Tim, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Thanks for inviting us on today. And, it is really early to be talking about Neil. Neil died only 10 days ago. And I know that for his family, especially, it's incredibly raw still. It's a very early time. It's far too early for Neil to go anyway. So this is quite an emotional period. And personally, I haven't had time to process Neil's death. It's very sudden. I was somebody very inspired by Neil. Before we perhaps go into it, I would just say, thank you to family, especially if you're watching at a later time, especially, Neil's grandsons, grandchildren and such like. And, we want to remember how amazing Neil was for the vegan movement. But of course, it wasn't just for the vegan movement, because Neil was first and foremost a fantastic all-round man. As a family man, as a very loyal person, and just outstanding qualities, on a very humble, a very solid level. But of course, too, Neil was a footballer, and he played for Everton, and he could have played for England. He played for England youth, and at a time we were just a minute of the World Cup through next week against France. Neil was an outstanding footballer. And Neil was also an outstanding musician, which is perhaps something that less people know, but he was a classical musician. He composed his own poses and such like. But it's this evening is that we kind of honour the place that Neil played in the animal rights movement and in the vegan movement, and particularly his position. As you mentioned, as the UK's first vegan professional footballer.
And Benny, you never met the great man, but you certainly you've been doing a bit of reading, and you was mentioning that he was very proud about being born actually near to Goodison Park, and Goodison Park is the ground of the Everton thing. We might have to translate a few things for people outside of Britain as we go.
Yeah, that's right. He was he's the player born closest to the home ground. So he was born within 100 metres of Goodison Park, and then grew up supporting them, and then eventually played for them. So it's a fantastic story, really. And I was in Liverpool on Saturday, and got talking to quite a few people about Neil, and people were sharing some memories of him, and saying, they remember seeing him in the 70s and everything. And even then, when coming into the 80s, they knew that he was vegan then, because he was vocal about it.
Yeah, it certainly was. He talked about he didn't talk about the vegan diet. He talked about a plant-exclusive diet connected to vegan philosophy, as I remember, Tim, which is good and quite a progressive way of talking about it, I think. So, okay, so we've actually got a bit of film of Neil to start with, and there's an old recording of this. Is unusual in a way because Neil went from Everton to Swansea City, and this clip is from Swansea versus Everton, but Neil had already been transferred, and in fact the film starts off by saying that there's 4 ex-Evertonians in the Swansea side, and so that's a little context that I kept in. So we'll let this play, and just to give you a flavour of like what Tim said, that the guy was a really good footballer, and so we should never forget that.
As then the country's costliest player at £350,000. Batchford's stay here ended in July when Kendall sold him to Swansea, and he now returns as their top scorer in a side which includes 3 other ex-Evertonians. At number 2, Neil Robinson, Gary Stanley, the substitute, who wears that shirt this afternoon with both the Yugoslavs returning, Hadziabdic and Rakovic, and of course Guy Davis, the goalkeeper, who made 82 league appearances for Everton. First free kick for the tackle on Ross by Robinson. Lyons. Sharp. Kendall stays down.
And just so I can clarify again, possibly for people outside of Britain, Neil is in one of the white shirts, and he's got number 2 on his back.
Knock around the mouth. That'll be a tooth. Stanley was hopeful. The shot was from Owen and well played. Neatly done by Bailey, and there's O'Keefe! Well, O'Keefe goes to take the crowd's congratulations for the cheek of the man in the foreground there, Alan Bailey, who nicked it off Colin Owen, much to Owen's chagrin, I'm sure. And O'Keefe was the Johnny on the spot to guide his header in. I must think that the Almighty has changed since he was here as an Everton goalkeeper, because nothing has gone right for him in this second half. When he lost the ball then, he was made to pay for it once again. Attendance of just under 24,000, which has seen the first victory since the end of October. Well, to a footballer, goals are the milk of confidence, and for Everton, how it showed in the second half.
Well, although they lost, I must say I enjoyed the way Swansea played. They were always ready to go forward. However, it was Howard Kendall's day, and one he won't easily forget. Needless to say, his performance was inspirational, but he was unable to describe it to us afterwards because the club doctor was inserting several stitches in his injured mouth.
Right, so
Rare
there's the
footage.
video clip.
That's in the
Say again,
days
Tim.
before they used to play. They didn't used to have cameras at all the games. So this is way back in the days when you used to have to stay up and watch match of the day to see your team, hope that it was one of the 3 games that was covered. So
Yeah, and you'd know if you arrived and you look up the gantry, and if there was cameras, you knew it was on Match of the Day, right?
Literally, that's the only one we could dig out and find actually of Neil playing, but he was playing there as a Beacon footballer. There was Neil, his distinctive ginger hair there, at playing number 2, as you mentioned, fullback, and there he was playing as a Beacon professional footballer. I think that's the significance of that little short archive. And thank you for people not into football for putting up with that rare, fascinating look. But there was Neil playing, and that's proof, as it were, of yeah. And it's fair to say, and I will say this as an Everton fan, I had Neil's picture on my wall when you go back to that picture there with Neil in his first, when he was 16, he signed for Everton in 1973. And by 1976, he'd made his debut under playing under Billy Bingham, who was the Everton manager then. And Neil was a progressive fullback. You know, he was very much suited to the modern day game. And it was just in an era when, you know, like you had to play people at Leeds and stuff, you know, dirty Leeds. And it was a tough game then, a lot tougher than it is now. Things that were allowed in the game then are not allowed now. And unfortunately, Billy Bingham left the club. And Billy Bingham was sort of nurtured Neil as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. And then by the time Bingham left, a guy called Gordon Lee took over. And Gordon Lee preferred sort of rather heftier, more brutal approach of Terry Darracott, who sadly passed away too recently, to Neil. And therefore, Neil didn't get that development at a crucial age. And I think, you know, peers of Neil would agree that, and certainly up in Liverpool, amongst the family, and of course, the Robinson family, I should note, is a very well-known family in Liverpool. 6 brothers and 1 sister, lots of grandkids now and kids. And of course, Sir Ken Robinson, the older brother, was a famous, well-known all over the world. Died just 3 years ago, and I don't think any of us expected Neil, the youngest of the 7, to be the next to go. Yeah.
Now, well, I think that bit is definitely true. Now, so Neil will be a teenager with these pictures, Tim, and obviously transcribed into these cards. So these cards are for the fans, is that right?
Yeah, this is in the days of when, you know, getting hold of football paraphernalia and such like. I mean, I was really lucky. I had a subscription to the Everton Matchday programme from age 9 years old. And so I never missed a matchday programme. And that was the sort of life and soul. And then you had Shoot, and you had Goal, which were weekly football magazines. And then you had the football cards. You used to collect the football cards. And as I mentioned, occasionally you get to see a team. If you're one of the top teams, you get to see them on either the big match or
The famous match of the day.
There he is.
That's programs.
For Everton.
You say, Tim, you used to have this program, yeah?
I had that program, yeah. I had them all. I remember that one distinctly on my wall, and you know, Neil was good enough to play for England. If he'd had the right manager, he could have played for England, and he would have been. He was like he was with the vegan thing. He's kind of 30 years ahead. If he'd been playing modern day now, Neil would have been so suited to the modern day game. You know, he's a really good passer, a tackler, an incredible tackler. He's very fit and very, very progressive. He's a thinker. He was a player above his station, and it is to some degree a regret that he never quite fulfilled the promise. But you know, he played at a level that the rest of us can dream of, and he fulfilled his promise way more than most. But that's, again, I underline just what an exceptional talent.
Yeah, I do remember Neil saying that of all the clubs that he played for, he was always in the top 3 in terms of fitness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And bear in mind that Neil went vegetarian age 13. So Neil went vegetarian age 13 when he was just about starting to think about becoming a professional footballer. So in 1970, I mean, that was an incredible time. And one of the things that I really take from Neil, the inspiration, is that, you know, he had the guts to do that. And there was a moral, ethical position. And he had at 13 that strength of mind to take that decision, which, you know yourself, was at that time, was like, you know, it was a big deal. Going vegetarian was a big deal, age 13, you know, in 1970. That's a very, very radical step. 50 years on, 52 years on, over half a century now, we might look at, you know, well, we look at some of the kids going vegan and we think, yeah, that's pretty radical, you know. But what Neil did age 13 at the cusp of adulthood, and then again, age 10 years later when he took a vegan position in 1980. And again, I would underline that Neil's position was always an ethical position. And in a way, he was possibly one of the first people to say, hey, you know what? Never mind about my sporting prowess. I'm not going to exploit animals, and that was a sacrifice that he never had to make, and he didn't make, because as we know, that didn't actually cost him anything. It gave him a lot. But at the time in 1970, he may not have known that. There wasn't enough role models around who maybe highly achieved on a plant-based diet to indicate against what the society was saying, which is you couldn't achieve on a plant-based diet.
And Benny, building on what Tim said there, I mean, when you think about it, he was 13, and he, as you said, lived in the shadow of Goodison Park, so a working class area, and he was also, a guy, and so that in itself is quite interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that shows strength of character, especially at the time. There wouldn't be that many vegetarians about, especially when you're going through high school. It's difficult enough as it is, but you're kind of making yourself stand out a little bit. And I know when he was older, some people had the nickname Banana Man for Neil, because he had bananas on toast a lot of the time, because that's all he could eat, especially traveling, that type of thing. And you think
there's a famous picture of him holding a banana, isn't there?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Well, speaking of famous pictures,
I did
Tim,
ask him, actually. One of the things I did ask. Yeah. I just on that note, Benny, I did ask Neil, actually, one of the times when I saw quite a lot of him 10 years ago. And one of the things was about what was the reaction in the dressing room and the club generally around Goodison Park to him being vegetarian. And he said, it's pretty good. There was one or two little, occasional little joke, but nearly all the time, it was just accepted. And yeah, it was quite interesting, actually, that there seemed to be very little pushback. And, that's what I remember anyway. I hope I got that right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
When you're just part of the team and everyone sees you just getting on with it, and you're professional and you're playing well, I suppose these days, I think some players think they're putting a little bit of pressure on themselves if they're vegan, because if you make any mistakes, people are going to say it's because you're vegan. We're still in that kind of society, really. So
they did say it's a bit tough to access vegan options when it's travelling or plant-based stuff. It was a bit
it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Lots of beans on toast, I think. And
that was a bit, it's pretty much. Yeah. but as you mentioned, Roger, he was always in the fittest and recovery time too. It's always interesting. Of course, we know the evidence supports this now, that plant-based diets, especially whole food optimum plant-based diets, support recovery for athletes. Really well. The nutrients are.
So he knew a lot about nutrition, though, because he came out. He would research it, wouldn't he? And then he came out with Frank bars, which was his own nutrition bar for athletes. Do you know much about that, Tim? Did he ever have them on display?
Yes. Well, 2013. Slightly gone out of sync about it, but such is life. But in 2013, Neil teamed up with a snack bar, nutritional snack bar, and this is 10 years ago now. And he sort of fronted the marketing campaign, was the frontman for the Frank bar, which is an early run, a vegan snack bar, and it was a sort of quite optimum nutritional dense. So it's more than sort of like a naked snack bar of some dates and cashew nuts or something. It had a bit more going on for it, and he was, again, that was a pioneer really at a time when people weren't doing that really. There was very little of that even a decade ago. Of course, now you're spoiled for choice, but then very
Well, to bring a couple of threads together of what's been said so far, Neil said to me that the only person who kind of had a bit of a go at him about what he should be eating was Bill Shankly. Bill Shankly is the manager of Liverpool, and he, is a kind of famous guy who said that, that football is more important than religion and all the rest of it and stuff like this. But as you were saying, Tim, Neil would have been perfect for today's game. When the pitches were good, and because in those days defenders are supposed to be big, or at least fairly chunky, and their main job was to kick people. And so
Yes.
that's where Shankly would have got it from, wouldn't he? Old fashioned.
And then
Yeah,
Forster,
that's what I
yeah.
mentioned. Billy Bingham was a more progressive manager, and he's the one who brought through Neil. And you know that footballers need that encouragement and confidence, and especially that key times. And Gordon Lee preferred, a different type of player. And the pitches, you're right, didn't lend itself to that type of passing game that we see today.
No. It's like AstroTurf now.
But he was a very good player. He had a lengthy career too, as I think Paul just put up there. He played for, a number of clubs in the 80s too. And again, I would underline just how highly he did achieve and how highly he could have achieved, I think, with a better coaching and management. He was in a very good team, actually. There was nothing wrong with the Everton team. The Everton team is a lot better than it is right now. And it was it was a top 4 team in those days. And it nearly won the title several times. But yeah. Anyway, Roger, we did promise we wouldn't talk about football.
We did, but it's hard. And
it is to reminisce of those golden years. Because, of course, you were on the terraces at Elland Road in 1972 yourself, weren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go there because you've already made one mention of dirty Leeds, so I'll leave it there.
Well, I'm not going to mention what you said about Everton.
No, but
we lived that back in the 70s. Yeah.
So I think our last picture of a football-related picture is the next one, which is an iconic picture, which I know Neil was very proud of this, Tim. So for people, again, outside, or, well, even people everywhere really nowadays, I suppose. So Neil is playing for Swansea at this stage, and the guy that he's tackling is Kenny Dalglish, seen as one of the best players in the world. And it's the cleanness of the tackle that I saw there, Tim.
Absolutely. It's a really fantastic photograph. The focus of Neil, and it sums up some of the characters of Neil so well. The cleanliness of the tackle, he's taking the ball. There's no question of any fouling. You can see Kenny Dalglish is, it's incredible. The focus, the look on Neil's face, and so clearly a Robinson. And
it looks like he's inside the box as well, so it's a dangerous thing to do, isn't it? Slide tackle inside the box.
Just incredible. Just incredible. Everybody looking on, just like, wow, that's the kind of person you want on your team. And he was a very accomplished player. And let's be clear, Kenny Dalglish, for those of you who don't remember him, albeit they played for Liverpool, he was an iconic player. He was one of the greatest players of his generation. And for Neil to take the ball off him was such aplomb. And such coolness. I love it so much. Anything wrong with it? He hasn't got an Everton shirt on, he's got a Swansea shirt on. But we'll let him off. And there's also a picture of a slightly robust-looking Bob Latchford in the background, who was my favourite player.
There is a detail in this picture that I don't know whether you know anything about, Tim, because the players are wearing black armbands. Do you know what that was about?
I don't know. No, it was a Swansea game, so I wouldn't have been interested.
Yeah, no.
I don't know, but
well, that's interesting. Anyway,
what I can say to credit Everton Football Club, they did run a very well-written obituary for Neil, and very soon after he died, and it had some very clear references to Neil as an ethical vegan footballer, and noted all of those aspects.
Yeah, well, we can show that on the screen once we've got through these pictures.
So there's Neil, the Banana Man, indeed, and Neil with his and Neil with Bob Latchford, and Neil in that iconic Everton shirt of the 1978, where he really is beginning to blossom into a player. Though you can see there's a bit more of a confidence about Neil. He's been playing for Everton a bit, and he's really beginning to look like he's part of that team.
I tell you one thing that Neil said to me was that the downside of his career, I think, was that he scored an own goal on his debut for Everton. So,
well, the one goal he did score for Everton that I know he scored, because I remember the game absolutely clearly, and it was, of course, the last game of the season when Everton beat Chelsea 6-2 in 1978, and Bob Latchford had to score 2 goals in that game to win a prize that the paper put up or something. Everybody's rooting for him to score 30 goals. And Neil scored a goal, his only goal for Everton. And all the Everton players were trying to get it disallowed and make a penalty instead, so that Bob Latchford could take it. So Neil was going crazy, running up and down the pitch, celebrating his goal. And all the rest of them were trying to get it chalked off, bless him. So, but yeah, and then we've got, this is Neil on tour. Now, Neil turned up at Vegfest in 2006, actually, at the World Cup, when we had the World Cup game, England-Paraguay screened, and David Beckham scored the first minute in the World Cup in 2006, and Neil and John, his brother, turned up out of the blue unannounced at what was then the Bristol Vegan Fair in, just before we went to the Harbour side in 2007. And I had no idea, and as soon as I met him, I was like, oh my God, I was obviously completely starstruck, and, really happy that Neil was vegan and his brother was vegan too. And they were beginning to show some interest in the vegan scene. But it wasn't until 2013 that Neil turned up to do his first smoothie demo. And he was booked to do the Bristol Vegan Fair, and we were going to do a smoothie demo. And I remember about, John getting in touch a couple of weeks before and saying, Neil's quite nervous about this. He's a little bit shy about it. I was like, what? Shy? This is a man who takes the ball off Kenny Dalglish in front of 40,000 in front of the Kop without any nerves at all. What do you mean, shy? And he's like, well, public speaking and stuff. It's like, right, okay. So I agreed that I would sort of co-present with Neil, and I was prepared to do the whole 45 minutes. And so I introduced Neil for about 30 seconds, and I handed him the mic. And that was it. I never saw the mic again. Neil just ate it up for breakfast. That was it. He was off. He never looked back. And all those nerves anymore, he wasn't sure. And then bang, he got that mic, and he was a natural on that mic. And he's a very inspirational speaker. And he did his first talk at the Bristol Vegan Fair, and he got a taste for it. And then Benny, he went and did one of the late fairs in St George, one of the St George's Hall in the middle of Liverpool, and I think in.
That's right. Yeah, I think I was 2012 because that was the first vegan fair I went to.
Yes.
So
you did a demo there in that beautiful.
Yeah. So I remember going around all the stalls, and first time I had a vegan hot dog. There was lots of stuff was new to me there. So, and I'd seen that Neil was doing the talk. So I think that was 2012 in St George's Hall. So the fair I went to on Saturday was the same organisation that did that one.
That's right. It's still going.
Live a Better Life. Vegan fairs, really, really good. Great guy that organises them as well, Colin.
Okay, people, for those who are joining us late, first of all, hello, but secondly, just to remind everyone, this is a tribute and a celebration of the life of Neil Robinson, the first ever vegan professional footballer. It's interesting, isn't it, Tim, in the sense that we are talking about, years and years and years before things like Game Changers and everything. And, the idea that, vegans can't be athletes. And Neil is groundbreaking in the sense that he showed that that's not true, even in, the macho world of the top flight, English football. So, groundbreaking in that sense. I agree with you about the talking. I met him in the East Midlands Vegan Festival, and he gave a talk there, and he was very confident. Just goes to show that if you do talks regularly, you get good at it. But that's for another conversation. Anyway, let's move on. Just
before we move on, I'll just point you back, actually, and this is quite significant. And again, this is where Neil really made a big difference, because Roger, you pointed to how much, way before things like the Game Changers, and we had a number. Well, now we've got vegan rugby clubs, and we've got professional footballers and all sorts, you know. But you roll that back 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when you and I were going vegan. And Neil went vegan in 1980, which was a year after you, 4 years before me. It was at a time when nobody was vegan in a professional athletes world, barely. There were one or two, to be fair. I think Martina Navratilova was playing tennis at quite top level, and then there was the sprinter, wasn't there? Carl
Lewis.
Yeah, he won the gold medal in 1988 at the Olympics.
Yeah.
There was some definite plant-based being, but like you said about the football, it's kind of that alpha male world, and you know there was Neil breezing in, you know, and taking the ball off Kenny Dalglish on a plant-based diet, and that shut a lot of people up, and it was a tough time. I used to get the mickey taken out of me regularly in those alpha male worlds because I was vegan and stuff. And yeah, I didn't really mind, but you know, even so, it's nice to have, you know, like some top flight people. But Neil went on tour in 2014, and he took his newfound skills and confidence, and he went out and he shared this with a number of these fledgling and up-and-coming UK regional vegan events, and really helped the grassroots and really inspired a lot of people and got some great media attention. And, you know, because obviously, like, the media was like, oh, you know, like, oh, vegan football, it's like a great story. It was a fabulous... And that was the time when we were working closest together. And absolute honour to be, you know, Neil's promoter, actually. I was basically his promoter. We managed to get ourselves into the Everton hospitality for one game before we sort of got found out that we were going to do an abolitionist vegan talk instead of reminiscing about our playing days. So we sort of got shut down. But we really took that into the community, and I credit Neil and his family too. John, especially his brother. You know, they came as a pair, and you know, Uncle John was like, you know. But all his family, because the whole thing, and Benny, this will resonate with you because you're from the area. You really know what family means there, and in Liverpool, you know, family, you know, it's just so solid. And the Robinsons, Neil, such credit to what already, as I mentioned, such a credit to that city, and somehow encapsulating some of the real beauty of that city. That is my own second home. I love that city to pieces, and Goodison Park is my second home. And Neil had those qualities to which I aspired to and still do, and he had them in abundance. And he came out and he shared them, and he never got paid or anything. It's all voluntary. You know, he did this out of a love for animals, and at the core of Neil's advocacy was animals, and that was something that I never really had encountered until I met Roger Yates, and then I did, and Benny Malone. But this is a year before, and if you remember, if you just go back to 2014, you remember that was the time when the whole kind of abolitionist thing kicked off with Gary Francione, the Vegan Society, and what is that, Pro Veg, and there's a big split over a few days, the marathon. And I was very much with Fiona Oakes and absolutely outraged that anybody could lay a hand into it. But Neil had a different view, and I couldn't believe it. But I had so much respect for Neil that I had to listen. And for the first time, I listened to what was really an animal rights perspective and not a human perspective that was...
It would have been so easy for Neil just to say, well, I'm just doing it for my health, wouldn't it? You know, I'm just doing it so I can recover quickly. I'm just doing it because I'm a sports person. It's a clean way of eating or whatever. But he was, you know, he was quite clear it was about the ethics.
He was an ethical vegan. And at our cost, it came between us a bit. You know, And I, in some respects, I regret that in some ways. But we kind of came back together on it, especially once I started agreeing with his perspective. That was a kind of breakthrough, you know. So it's a really interesting time, and I credit Neil Robinson with having not only the guts to get on a plant-based diet in 1970, again 1980, but to take that ethical vegan position and advocate for it, even if it meant possibly, you know, I don't know, upsetting people.
Yeah.
That didn't matter. And I respect that quality so much. Yeah.
Well, again, bringing a couple of threads together, the very existence of Neil Robinson was useful for me when I was playing football at university. I used to play 3 times a week at one time when I was in Wales. And it was great because, you know, obviously, even though you don't shout about it, people eventually get to know you're vegan and everything. And I remember very clearly quite a lot of, you know, I mean, there's one guy, Andrew, I can think of right now, and he once came up and he told me, and he said, it's amazing, you know, because you've changed my mind about things like veganism, because there was a kind of house party the other day, and somebody was talking about, oh, vegetarians, they're not very, you know, the usual thing, thin and all that kind of stuff. And he said, well, listen, you know, I play football with a vegan who's twice my size and twice as good, so knock it on the head type of thing. And so, you know, you could, and the fact that you could point to the fact that there was someone like Neil playing at the top flight was really useful in that sense, you know.
Yeah, and it was, and you know, I know it still is, and I think people listening in different communities, you know, sometimes it can be quite lonely being vegan. We're quite lucky these days. It's surrounded, and especially with online and internet and everything, got lots of strong vegan communities, and you know. But at that time, it did take, depending on where you were, you know, like.
Well, again, it's strength of character, isn't it? I mean, it must have been quite lonely being the first and only vegan footballer.
Yeah, I mean, when I was vegan on the festivals. So, like during the 80s, you know, like I was vegan at Stone Angel, the free festivals. It's like there was a whole vegetarian culture there already. Rainbow lentils, we used to joke, indeed. And so, you know, for somebody to be vegan and actually like cut out all animal products wasn't so much of a shift from what was already part of the green culture and part of the eco hippie ethos anyway. And although I was the only vegan on the road at the time that I remember sitting on the convoy, there was no other vegans. There was, you know, like 7 other vegetarians. And that was important because especially some of the real alpha males there were vegetarian. And that meant something at that time because, you know, they were different times, and hopefully those days of those sort of toxic masculinity and all that stuff are, you know, less and less. So perhaps it's becoming more okay to be vegan or whatever, you know, in fact respected as a position amongst the youth of today, I would hope. But certainly 30, 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, stereotypes do last. Sorry, Benny, what are you saying?
No, I didn't say anything there.
Okay. I think it was a delay. Should I move on the slides?
Yeah.
So I don't know. You know the details of these, Tim, do you?
Yes. So this one here is Neil with the cake. Now this was taken at Forest Green Rovers on World Vegan Day 2014, November 1st. Obviously, Forest Green Rovers, which have then just celebrating as the world's vegan football club, and you can see the Vegan Society. It was also celebrating the 70th anniversary. I think I might have that. I think that's correct. No, that's not correct. It wouldn't have been. Would have been the 69th anniversary, something like that. Anyway, but there you go. There's Neil. Maybe it was 2015. I can't remember, but
if it was 70.
Yeah. That's the Vegan Society at Forest Green Rovers, and there's Neil, looking very dapper in a tie, and you know, just again an indication of some of the outreach and the significance of how he was recognised by what is now recognised by FIFA as the most green club in the world. You know, credit to Dale Vince and Uko Schüssler and Forest Green Rovers for maintaining that stance and that position. And I think it was fitting that they chose Neil Robinson to be their guest of honour on that occasion. It indicates how much people in the vegan movement recognise Neil's achievements and how much they valued them for much the same reasons we've been, touching on, is just that recognition of that strength, that leadership, if you like, that having the balls to do what you want to do at a young age and lead the way regardless. Those attributes are mightily valuable. And this picture on the right here is taken in 2014 up at Goodison Park. And there's 4 legends in there. Well, 3 legends to be truthful. And out of respect for that photograph, actually, I'm wearing the same shirt and tie, obviously the Everton shirt. But that's Paul Rideout there on the middle, and Paul Rideout was the last guy to score an FA Cup final winner goal for Everton back in 1995 when it beat Man United 1-0, so that was quite significant. And the one on the right, actually, Roger, do you not recognise the gentleman on the right?
I don't think I do, but I know he's an ex-Leeds player because...
This played for Leeds,
yeah.
A maverick player, lovely bloke, actually, Duncan McKenzie.
I do know him, yeah, of course, yeah. So he came in when the Revy team was starting to disintegrate.
Yes. So Duncan McKenzie was probably just a year or 2 older than Neil and was excelling at top flight. Absolute fabulous player, that sort of 70s ilk. But there you go, there's some great memories and just how much.
McKenzie was very tall, though. He doesn't look tall there, does he? So
Duncan McKenzie is not a tall player. No, there's Neil, though. Neil, you can see, he's just a bit shorter than me, and I'm not a tall person either. Paul Rideout's a bit bigger than us, but Neil is stocky and strong. Neil is a strong, he was a fullback in the Premier League or top flight football. He was a strong player. Yeah.
And then we've got one final one, Goodison Park.
Yeah. Now this is interesting. Yes, we went up to Goodison Park and we had did some hospitality there. We had such an awful vegan meal. We got in touch with them. That's so terrible. Can we come and show you how to do it better? And they were not that impressed, but they said, yeah. So this guy on the right is Kieran, who was the head chef at the Goodison Park. I think they did 1,500 covers, and they had about 100 vegetarian and no vegan. So we came up with Tony Bishop Weston, who's a professional vegan chef, and Neil and John back us up because we reckon that a couple of Cockney merchant bankers coming up telling a few Scousers how to cook their food didn't go down that well. So we brought a couple of genuine Scousers with us to sit with and it did. It went down a treat, actually. The whole Everton hospitality team, which was an award-winning Premiership team, I should state. They won the award for the best hospitality. Took on the whole vegan thing, and they took on how to make vegan desserts. And we even created them a toffee tower. Like, anybody who knows Everton and Liverpool, there's a tower, old tower from the Victorian times, which is the Everton badge there. In fact, it's not on there, but it's there. And you can see it just behind in the logo. And we made a dessert made out of coconut and stuff in the chef room. And they were great, and they took on board all our stuff. And Neil worked with them, and John, this is John Neil's brother, and worked with Everton at Goodison Park. This is 10 years ago to show them really how to cater for vegans. And again, it's just an indication of the very real and visceral influence that Neil and John and family had on the vegan on multiple levels. And it's just really paying tribute to the fact that Neil Robinson was, one of the most influential vegans of our generation in ways that many of us possibly never even realised.
So Tim and Benny, I've not been to in fact, I think the last professional football team game I went to was at Goodison, funny enough, Everton versus Leeds, and you lot won. But in the modern day, do do the clubs cater for vegans, like at half time and that kind of stuff nowadays, or is it still kind of pies and all the rest of it like it used to be?
All I know is about Forest Green Rovers, really, when they brought in, total vegan catering at theirs. But I know some other clubs have tried, and there has been a bit of pushback in places. But, Everton are going to be moving ground, so you would think with it modernising and everything that there will be more vegan options, maybe even a completely kind of vegan store, maybe, or something.
Yeah, it's poor. We went to Old Trafford and they didn't have a Danny LaRue about vegan options. Yeah. It's a very disappointing. But it's a while since the last game I went to actually was only 6 weeks ago. I got invited up to Fulham Everton. They've got a lovely new ground there actually, but it's not quite open.
Now, Tim,
there was no vegan options at the ground. It was just a lot of smelly sausages. So I wasn't really happy.
All the way through, I've been careful to make sure we can do a bit of translating for people outside of Britain. So I invite you to translate what you mean by a Danny LaRue.
Clue, yeah, right, okay. No ideas, no clue. Yes.
No
so
clue.
It's a bit right, excuse me.
Kind of Cockney.
Shows that I'm not from Liverpool, I'm from London, so
yeah.
That's what
this was 2015, Tim. This one. The photo.
Yeah, 2013 actually.
Yeah, well, you can see Neil's looking quite trim there, And I know in 2015 he did the Land's End to John O'Groats cycle ride.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so he kept himself fit all the way through, really.
Yeah,
and Neil was training a cycle ride. I think it was 9 days to cycle the length of Britain.
Yes.
Yeah, I got a podcast with Neil, and he talks about that, and he talks about the training and about how grueling it was and everything. Yeah. So it was he went Land's End to John O'Groats. That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And he was injured on that, and I know this from listening because again his brother John, who is always the support, and John, I know you've been listening at some point.
Just very briefly,
being such support for me because that cycle ride, Neil, first of all, he raised thousands of pounds for vegan charities, which again was an indication of something that he didn't shout about. People wouldn't know, which is kind of why I wanted to come up here and sort of pay tribute to these achievements, because I know he did them, and he raised funds for 20 or 30 different animal sanctuaries and vegan groups, and he gave them all money, and he really suffered on that trip. Like he got a knee injury, and he finished that, what is it, over 1,000 miles or something ridiculous, a very punishing ride. He was 58 when he did that, and he was super fit, Neil, and I'm sure he kept himself fit for the last few years. I haven't seen Neil since we went to a game at Goodison and sat just behind where you can see those seats, and we watched Everton Stoke, and Everton won 1-0. And one of the things I remember is I sat right next door to Neil, and that's the last time I saw him, and a guy died of a heart attack in the middle of the game, and the game stopped at 52 minutes because there's a gentleman had died of a heart attack in the stand, and they stopped the game for 10 minutes whilst they had to unfortunately take the guy out, and that's the last time I saw him.
That's a bit poignant, isn't it? In a way.
Yeah. And Benny, you mentioned Everton are moving. Another 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Will be at Bramley Moor, and in fact next season I think it'll be the last season. And I will be making. I haven't been up to Goodison for a while. But I will be going up there for a game. And I will be feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I should be feeling there. I'll be really missing it.
Yeah, you're also planning on going to the funeral, Tim.
at Neil's funeral yet.
Well,
It's early days to be.
this so I guess we're getting near to the end, I suppose, but this is the Everton. This is the thing that we were just chatting on Facebook about some vegan related thing, and Tim, this popped up on your news feed, and we were all a bit devastated.
Yeah, I mean, how do you break the news? What do you do? Do you know what? I was actually grateful that Everton had covered this unfortunate occasion, and I didn't have to write anything because I wouldn't have known what to write. And they've written some really beautiful words here, actually. There's just some really relevant words. And
it's got a great start, groundbreaking footballer, and I mean, they're referencing veganism right at the start there.
Yes.
So I mean, in the second sentence, they've got
and this is the significance, and it was very sudden. You know, it said he suffered a cardiac arrest on Thursday. That was a week ago. You know, it was only last Friday morning. I was informed of that sad news, and as I said, I haven't really processed it yet. We've had quite a few deaths to process recently, and you know, I know how raw this is for Neil's family still. I just hope, you know, in years to come by, you know, we'll be able to perhaps look at this and go, yeah, and think about those achievements, because in time that rawness, you know, heals, and those memories become happier than
right now. Well, I mean, I think we should take that first sentence there to heart, that he was groundbreaking and he was a trailblazer. So, Benny, do you want to say any closing thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I just think with that tribute from Everton, it shows, you know, it really reflects what was important to Neil, and veganism was central to his life. It was something he campaigned for, talked about, and that was what was close to his heart, and he cared about it as an issue. So I think that's a really fitting tribute, and you know, he'll always be the first vegan footballer. He was the pioneer, so he's always going to be in the history books for that. The first goal by a vegan, and really pioneering, and just really inspiring as well, just to have someone out there doing it. You know, it's like people say, you know, those who say it can't be done should get out of the way of those who are doing it, and Neil was someone who did it, you know.
Well, for myself, I'll always be honoured in the sense that he called me one of his heroes, and I said he was one of mine. So.
Yeah, you two had a real mutual respect for each other, Roger. And I would say that was a really important time. And I haven't told anybody this. Actually, Neil was one of the big reasons why VegFest embraced Gary Francione and the whole approach. But Neil was also responsible pretty much for when we parted company with Gary too, because it was when Neil went on Gary's page and said, you know what, I've had enough of this. And for me, Neil was like a yardstick. You know, he was a peer, but he was just a few years ahead of me, and obviously highly achieved at levels that I could only, in my dreams, you know. But what I would just want to say about Neil to end with is, for Neil was really one of the good guys. On average, Neil was a real good guy, and you know, he came from a city where there are some real good families, and the Robinson family is, for me, the greatest family to come out of Liverpool, and my family comes out of Liverpool, and I'm mighty proud of that. And Neil really encapsulated the best, and you know, that city's a tough city. Neil was a good guy, and he had the guts to be who he wanted to be. So we said goodnight to the good guy. It's the last time we said good night to this guy. Let me tell you.
Right, people. Well, thank you, Tim and Benny, and thanks for everybody tuning in.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Benny. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And my love to the Robinson family and respect to Neil. And thank you. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, Neil.
Yeah. See you, everyone.